My name is Clara Hawthorne, and at 34 years old, I am the founder and chief strategist of a boutique investment firm that specializes in sustainable technologies. But that's the ending, or at least, the beginning of a new chapter. The story I need to tell you starts much earlier, in a lawyer's stuffy office filled with the scent of old paper and grief, on the day my own family declared me too flighty, too artistically minded, too much of a woman to understand the weight of a dollar. I never imagined that the moment they took away my future would be the first step I'd take toward becoming the anonymous benefactor who would one day save them all from utter ruin. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How the people who think they know you best often see the least of who you truly are. Before I dive into how a woman with $100 weekly allowance built a secret empire from the ashes of her own inheritance, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've ever had that frustrating feeling of being completely and totally underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new faces here, make sure you subscribe to join this community of people who understand that the best comebacks are the ones no one ever sees coming. The day my father's will was read was a study in gray. The sky outside the law offices of Peterson, Finch, and Gable was the color of wet slate, and the mood inside was just as somber. My mother, Helen, sat ramrod straight in her chair, a black veil doing little to hide the rigid set of her jaw. My older brother, Julian, was beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture that seemed more proprietary than comforting. He was already stepping into the role of patriarch, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his expression a practiced mask of solemn responsibility. I sat slightly apart from them, my own grief a raw, hollow thing that made the room feel too small, too loud. Mr. Peterson, a man who had known my father for 40 years, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read. The initial bequests were standard, sentimental. My father's watch to Julian, my grandmother's pearls to me, donations to his favorite charities. My heart ached with a fresh wave of loss. He had been a good man, a loving father, but a man of his time with ideas about the world and about his children that were as solid and unyielding as the oak desk he sat behind. Then Mr. Peterson arrived at the crux of the matter. The estate. The Hawthorne timber fortune was considerable, built over 3 generations of hard work and shrewd business dealings. My father had managed it well, growing it substantially. I held my breath, not out of greed, but out of a desperate need for a sign that he had seen me, truly seen me. The lawyer's voice droned on. And the remainder of my estate, including all properties, stocks, bonds, and controlling interest in Hawthorne Timber LLC, shall be placed into a revocable living trust, to be known as the Hawthorne Family Trust. He paused, looking over his glasses first at Julian, then at me. The sole trustee of this fund, he continued, his eyes lingering on my brother, shall be my son, Julian Hawthorne, whose sound judgment and astute business sense I have always relied upon. A small, almost imperceptible puff of pride expanded Julian's chest. He gave my mother's shoulder a squeeze. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew what was coming next. For my daughter Clara, Mr. Peterson read, and I could hear my father's voice in the carefully chosen words, whose artistic soul and vibrant spirit have always been a source of joy, but whose grasp of practical matters is, shall we say, more ethereal. The legal jargon was a flimsy veil for the sentiment beneath. Flighty, frivolous, unreliable. I direct my trustee, Julian, to provide her with a weekly allowance of $100 for her personal sundries. Furthermore, the trust will cover the costs of her housing, utilities, and health insurance, to ensure she is always cared for and safe from the complexities of the financial world. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a ringing, deafening silence. Cared for. Safe from. These were the words of a gilded cage. I looked from the lawyer's sympathetic yet pitying face to my mother's, which was placid, accepting. She truly believed this was for the best. Then I looked at Julian. There was no sympathy in his eyes. There was a gleam of victory, a subtle smirk of vindication. He had always seen me as the artistic one, A charming but ultimately useless accessory to the family's serious business. This document, my father's last will and testament, was the ultimate validation of his worldview. "Is this a joke?" I whispered, the words barely audible. Julian finally looked at me, his expression softening into one of condescending patience. "Clara, don't be dramatic. Dad just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. You know how you are with money. Just slips through your fingers. Remember that pottery course you took? Or the trip to Italy to find yourself?" Each word was a tiny, sharp jab, reminding me of every time I had chosen passion over practicality in his eyes. "I was 20 years old, Julian," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "He's treating me like a child." "He's treating you like someone he loved and wanted to protect," my mother said softly, her voice final. "Your father knew best. Now is not the time to argue." Arguing was futile. The ink was dry. The decision had been made years ago, codified in this document that stripped me of my agency and my inheritance in one fell swoop. I was a 30-year-old woman with a weekly allowance a teenager would scoff at. The drive home was a blur of rain-streaked windows and suffocating silence. In the following weeks, my new reality settled in like a damp chill. Julian reveled in his role. He would hand me my $100 envelope every Friday with a little flourish, often accompanied by a patronizing comment. "Here you are, Clara. Try not to spend it all in one place. Maybe buy a nice book on budgeting," he'd say with a wink. The irony was so thick it was nauseating. My life became a performance of cheerful compliance. I painted in the small studio apartment the trust paid for. I met friends for coffee I could barely afford, and I smiled through family dinners where Julian would hold court, pontificating about the market. He spoke a language of puts and calls, of leveraging assets and aggressive growth strategies. He talked about my inheritance, our inheritance, as if it were a high-stakes game he was born to play. "The market rewards the bold, Clara," he'd announced to the dinner table. "You have to be willing to take big risks to see big rewards. I'm looking at some very interesting speculative assets in the biotech sector. High risk, of course, but the upside is astronomical." My mother would nod along, her eyes filled with admiration for her brilliant son. I would sit there, stirring my soup, feeling the humiliation burn in my cheeks. They saw a dilettante, a dreamer. They saw a child who needed protecting from herself. And in that constant, unending condescension, a different feeling began to take root, deep in the soil of my anger. It wasn't despair. It was resolve. Cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. If they thought I was incapable, I would become capable. If they thought I couldn't understand their world, I would learn its language, master its rules, and beat them at their own game. It started in the most unassuming of places, the quiet, dusty corner of the local public library. I was there to escape my tiny apartment, to lose myself in novels, but one afternoon, I found myself in the non-fiction section. My eyes fell on a title, The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. I pulled it from the shelf, its cover worn, its pages soft with use. I sat down and began to read. The world of finance, the one Julian made sound like a mystical, impenetrable fortress, began to reveal itself not as magic, but as logic. It was a world of numbers, yes, but also of psychology, of patience, of understanding value where others only saw price. It was a puzzle, and I had always been good at puzzles. That book was the first stone in what would become the foundation of my new life. My library visits became my secret obsession. I was no longer reading fiction. I was devouring everything I could find on economics, market analysis, corporate finance, and portfolio theory. The librarians got to know me. This quiet woman who spent hours hunched over dense textbooks in a corral by the window. One of them, a kind, silver-haired woman named Mrs. Gable, took a particular interest. She didn't ask questions, but she seemed to understand something was happening. She would leave newly acquired finance journals on my table with a quiet smile. "Thought you might find this interesting, dear," she'd murmur before moving on. She was my first, unwitting ally. I filled notebooks with meticulous notes, creating my own curriculum. I watched free university lectures online, pausing and rewinding until complex concepts like discounted cash flow and EBITDA became as familiar to me as the names of paint pigments. While Julian was chasing risky gambles and market hype, I was learning the slow, steady art of building real, sustainable wealth. I was learning to find the signal in the noise. The hardest part was saving. $100 a week doesn't leave much room for maneuvering after basic necessities. I became ruthlessly frugal. I learned to cook cheap, nutritious meals. I mended my own clothes. I walked everywhere instead of taking the bus. Every spare dollar went into a simple envelope hidden in a hollowed-out book. It took me 6 long, painstaking months to save up $1,000. Felt like $1 million. With that seed capital, I was ready. I couldn't open a brokerage account in my own name. Julian received copies of all my official mail as part of his trustee duties. The risk of discovery was too high. I needed an alias, a ghost. I spent a week researching, learning about digital privacy, VPNs, and creating a secure, untraceable online identity. I chose a name that felt like an armor. Aurelius. It sounded classical, weighty, and deliberately gender-ambiguous. To the world, Aurelius would be a private, discerning investor. No one would ever suspect it was the flighty Clara Hawthorne, living on pocket money. Opening the online brokerage account was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life. I transferred my $1,000, my life savings, into the account. For a full day, I just stared at the number on the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. This was real. My first investment was not a speculative biotech stock or a volatile tech startup. It was a small, calculated purchase of shares in a well-established, boring utility company. It had a strong balance sheet, a history of reliable dividends, and was deeply undervalued by a market chasing flashier things. It was the kind of stock Julian would have laughed at. To me, it was beautiful. It was safe. It was a start. The first dividend payment arrived 3 months later. $7.53. I stared at the notification on my laptop screen, a huge, ridiculous grin spreading across my face. It was the most powerful, most meaningful money I had ever earned. It wasn't an allowance doled out with a patronizing smile. It was mine. I had created it from knowledge and discipline. I reinvested it immediately. That $7 was the first drop in what I was determined to make a flood. Family dinners became a new kind of torture, a test of my composure. I had to sit there, listening to Julian boast about his latest gamble, my secret knowledge burning like a hot coal in my chest. I've just sunk a significant portion of the trust into a new social media venture, ConnectSphere, he announced one Sunday, beaming. It's pre-IPO. Very exclusive. Mark my words, this is going to be bigger than Facebook. We'll double our money in a year. I had researched ConnectSphere for my own potential portfolio. My analysis had shown it had a weak user acquisition model and was burning through cash with no clear path to profitability. It was a house of cards. My internal monologue was screaming, "Asterisk, get out. It's a terrible investment. You're going to lose everything." Asterisk, but outwardly I just smiled faintly and said, "That sounds exciting, Julian." "Oh, it is," he said, waving his fork dismissively. "It's all about spotting the next big thing, Clara. Takes a certain kind of vision. You wouldn't understand the metrics." The condescension was so reflexive, he didn't even realize he was doing it. But I did understand the metrics. I understood them better than he did. I knew that vision without due diligence was just hallucination. And as I sat there, quietly eating my roast chicken, I made another investment in my mind. A short position on social media ventures with high cash burn rates. I was learning to profit from his arrogance. While he was playing the game, I was studying the entire stadium. The next few years fell into a steady, secret rhythm. By day, I was Clara Hawthorne, the charming, slightly aimless artist who lived on her brother's benevolent authority. I took up gardening. I volunteered at an animal shelter. I built a life of quiet, unassuming hobbies that provided the perfect cover for my real work. But at night, my small apartment transformed into a command center. I wasn't just Clara anymore. I was Aurelius. My portfolio grew, slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum. My initial $1,000 became $10,000, then $50, then $100. The utility stock had been the first step. From there I moved into other undervalued sectors. I invested in a logistics company that was quietly revolutionizing supply chain management. I bought into a medical device manufacturer that had a groundbreaking patent nobody was paying attention to. I focused on tangible assets, strong leadership, and long-term sustainable growth. My strategy was the tortoise to Julian's hare. I was meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless in my analysis. Aurelius began to build a small reputation in certain online financial circles. A mysterious, insightful analyst whose occasional posts on obscure forums were remarkably prescient. I developed a contact, a broker named Ben, who only knew me as the disembodied, authoritative voice on the other end of an encrypted line. "Mr. Aurelius, your call on that renewable energy subsidiary was genius," he told me once, his voice buzzing with excitement. "It's up 40% since you bought in. The rest of the market is only just catching on. How do you do it?" "I read the footnotes," I'd replied dryly. Meanwhile, the hare was getting tired. Julian's high-risk ventures were a roller coaster. For every win he trumpeted at the dinner table, I could see the signs of 3 quiet failures in the quarterly trust statements he was legally obligated to send me. Getting those statements was a battle in itself. My first request was met with a laugh. "Clara, what on earth for? You'll just get a headache looking at all those numbers." "It's my legal right to see them, Julian," I had insisted, my voice firmer than he was used to. He eventually relented, but the documents he sent were often late and incomplete. It didn't matter. I could read between the lines. I saw the churn, the frantic buying and selling, the desperate chasing of trends. He got lucky with a crypto coin, making a small fortune and becoming even more insufferable for a few months. Then, just as I predicted, the bubble burst, and a quiet but significant loss appeared on the next statement, disguised as a portfolio rebalancing. He started to look frayed at the edges. There were new lines of stress around his eyes. His confident pronouncements at dinner became slightly more defensive, more brittle. He started talking about a new, massive project. A legacy project. He was going to transform a forgotten stretch of waterfront into a luxury condominium development, Hawthorne Point. He spoke of it in grandiose terms, comparing himself to the great architects and city planners of history. "This isn't just an investment," he declared. "It's about cementing the Hawthorne name for another century." To fund this grand vision, he was leveraging the trust to an astonishing degree. I saw the massive loans, the capital outflows to shell corporations with opaque names. The risk was breathtaking. My blood ran cold as I studied the paperwork. He was essentially betting the entire family fortune on a single, ill-conceived property flip in a market that was already showing signs of saturation. Had to try. I had to at least try to warn him. I found him in his study one evening, poring over blueprints. I approached the topic cautiously, feigning casual curiosity. "That Hawthorne Point project sounds like a huge undertaking, Julian," I began. He beamed, eager to explain his genius. "It's the biggest deal of my life, Clara. It's going to be magnificent." "I was just looking at some local news articles," I said, my heart pounding. "It mentioned some potential zoning challenges in that area, and the city council seems hesitant about new luxury developments." His face hardened instantly. The mask of the visionary fell away, replaced by the familiar sneer of condescension. "Clara, please," he said, not even looking up from his papers. "What do you know about zoning laws or market absorption rates? Stick to your paintings. This is complicated. It's too complex for you to understand." His dismissal was so absolute, so automatic, it was like a slap. I looked at him, at this man who was gambling away our legacy, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. He was going to fail, and I had to be ready for the fallout. My conviction was solidified by a small, personal project I undertook as Aurelius. Mrs. Gable, my librarian ally, had mentioned one day that her son's independent bookstore, The Last Page, was on the verge of closing. A new mega bookstore had opened in the same plaza, and they couldn't compete. She spoke of her son's passion, his dream, crumbling into dust. It was a small-scale version of what Julian was doing, a big, flashy competitor trying to crush something of real, quiet value. That evening, Aurelius made a new investment. Through a local small business development fund, I made a targeted, anonymous injection of capital into The Last Page. It wasn't a huge amount in the grand scheme of my growing portfolio, but it was enough. Enough for them to modernize their inventory system, launch a coffee bar, and start hosting community events. It was enough for them to survive and then to thrive. 6 months later, Mrs. Gable tearfully told me that some anonymous angel had saved her son's shop. Seeing the genuine joy on her face, knowing that I had used my knowledge to build something up rather than tear it down, solidified my purpose. This was what money was for. It was a tool, and in the right hands it could protect and create, not just speculate and destroy. The whispers about Hawthorne Point started about a year after that. They were quiet at first, murmurs at social gatherings. A contractor was suing for non-payment. The initial sales of the condominium units were sluggish, far below projections. At my mother's annual garden party, a man who had been my father's friend for decades, a shrewd old lumber baron named Mr. Harrison, pulled me aside. His eyes were kind but deeply worried. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I'm hearing some worrying things about Julian's development. The man is over-leveraged. He's a gambler, not a builder like your father was. Be careful." The warning, from a man I respected so deeply, was the final confirmation. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here. The final family dinner before the collapse was surreal. Julian was a ghost at the head of the table, his face pale and waxy. He barely spoke, pushing food around his plate. My mother, ever the loyal defender, tried to fill the silence with cheerful chatter, but the tension was a physical presence in the room. She attributed his stress to overwork, to the pressures of his genius. "Julian is just working so hard on his project," she said, casting a proud look at his bowed head. "It's bound to take a toll." I looked at my brother, this hollowed-out man, and I didn't feel triumph or schadenfreude. I just felt a profound sadness. He had been given everything, every advantage, every ounce of trust, and he had squandered it all, driven by an ego that could not bear to be questioned, especially by his flighty little sister. I went home that night and made the final preparations. I liquidated a portion of my portfolio, moving a substantial sum into a highly stable, accessible account. I contacted my lawyer. I wrote out a plan, a series of steps to be executed when the time came. I was no longer just an investor. I was becoming a first responder. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was my mother, her voice a thin, ragged thread of panic I had never heard before. "Clara, you have to come. It's Julian. He's locked himself in the study. There are men at the door. They say they're from the bank. They're talking about foreclosure." I don't understand. I understood perfectly. "I'm on my way, Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady, a rock in her sea of hysteria. The scene at the family home was one of controlled chaos. 2 grim-faced men in suits were speaking to a distraught-looking housekeeper in the foyer. My mother was pacing in the living room, wringing her hands. The air was thick with the metallic scent of fear. I walked past them all and knocked on the study door. "Julian. It's Clara. Let me in." There was a long silence, then the sound of a lock turning. He was sitting behind our father's enormous oak desk, but he seemed shrunken, diminished. The confident master of the universe was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling man who couldn't meet my eyes. The story came out in a torrent of shame-filled whispers and broken sentences. Hawthorne Point had been a catastrophic failure. The loans were called in. He had cross-collateralized everything: the trust, the family home, his own assets, to cover the spiraling costs. The creditors were descending. The trust wasn't just empty. It was deeply in debt. The Hawthorne fortune, built over a century, had been wiped out in less than a decade. We were bankrupt. Worse than bankrupt. My mother began to weep, a raw, painful sound that seemed to tear at the foundations of the house itself. Julian just sat there, his head in his hands, repeating the same phrase over and over. It's all gone. It's all gone. I watched them for a moment, this tableau of ruin. My mother, whose blind faith had enabled this disaster. My brother, whose arrogance had caused it. I felt a surge of the old anger, the familiar sting of humiliation. But it was followed by something else, something I hadn't expected. A quiet, profound clarity. My secret education, my years of patient, disciplined work, had not just been for me. They had been for this moment. I'm going to make some calls, I said, and my voice was so calm it startled even me. They both looked up, their faces etched with confusion and despair. What calls could I possibly make? Who did the flighty, penniless sister even know? I went back to my own apartment, the sanctuary I had built for myself. The chaos of my family home faded away, replaced by the quiet hum of my laptop. I logged into my secure email, the one belonging to Aurelius. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a message I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. It was addressed to one person, Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer, the man who had read my father's will all those years ago. The email was concise and professional. It outlined an offer from a third-party investor, Aurelius, to absorb the entirety of the Hawthorne family's debt, including the mortgages on all properties and the outstanding liabilities of the trust. It included an offer to recapitalize the family with a significant, multi-million-dollar infusion of new funds. The email concluded with 3 non-negotiable conditions. 1. Julian Hawthorne was to be immediately and permanently stripped of any and all financial authority. He would no longer be a trustee, an officer, or even a signatory on any family account. 2. A new sole trustee would be appointed by the benefactor, with absolute and final control over the new funds and all family assets. 3. The identity of this new trustee, and of the benefactor himself, would be revealed only after the Hawthorne family had formally and legally agreed, in writing, to the first 2 terms. I hit send. The response from Mr. Peterson came in less than an hour. He was shocked, of course, but he was also a pragmatist. He recognized a lifeline when he saw one. He agreed to present the offer to my family. The call from him came the next day. "They've agreed, Clara," he said, his voice holding a note of wonder. "They're desperate. They signed the papers this morning. They want to meet the benefactor. The meeting is set for tomorrow at my office. 10 a.m. "The benefactor won't be there," I said calmly. "But the new trustee will be." The next morning, I walked into that same stuffy gray office where my life had been so unceremoniously derailed years before. The mood was different this time. It wasn't grief. It was a mixture of desperation, humility, and a fragile, flickering hope. Julian looked like he hadn't slept in a week. My mother clutched her handbag as if it were a life raft. They both looked at the empty chair beside me, expecting some powerful, mysterious man to walk through the door at any moment. Mr. Peterson began the meeting, his voice formal. "We are gathered today to finalize the agreement with the benefactor known as Aurelius. As you know, you have agreed to the primary conditions. Julian, your status as trustee has been officially revoked." Julian flinched but said nothing. "The funds to clear all outstanding debts have been transferred to an escrow account and will be released upon the conclusion of this meeting. All that remains is the final condition, to name the new trustee." He paused, picking up a single sheet of paper. The air in the room was electric. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide. Julian stared at the table, a man awaiting his sentence. Mr. Peterson looked up, and for the first time, he didn't look at Julian or my mother. He looked directly at me. A slow, dawning comprehension spread across his aging features. "As per the final binding instruction from the benefactor," he said, his voice clear and steady, "the newly appointed sole trustee of the reconstituted Hawthorne Family Trust, with full and absolute authority, is Miss Clara Hawthorne." Silence. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. My mother blinked, her brow furrowed in utter confusion. Julian's head snapped up, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "Clara!" He choked out, a raw, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "That's impossible. It's a joke. A cruel joke." "It's no joke, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly level. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim leather-bound folder. I slid it across the polished mahogany table towards him. "Aurelius is my creation. For the last 7 years, while you were gambling with our legacy, I was building a new one." He opened the folder. Inside was a consolidated summary of the Aurelius portfolio, a detailed breakdown of assets, growth charts, and a final net worth figure with a staggering number of zeros after it. He stared at the pages, his hands trembling. The blood drained from his face as the truth, the impossible, undeniable truth, finally sank in. I wasn't the flighty sister anymore. I was the house. And I had just bought all his chips. The ride home from the lawyer's office was a masterclass in suffocating silence. I drove, my hands steady on the wheel of my modest sedan. My mother sat in the passenger seat, rigid, her body angled towards the window as if the familiar suburban houses rushing past could offer some explanation for the reality-bending events of the past hour. Julian was folded into the back seat, a man hollowed out, utterly silent. He hadn't said a single word since staring at the portfolio summary. He just looked out his own window, his reflection a pale, ghostly mask. The power dynamic, the one that had defined our entire lives, hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I was no longer the passenger in my own life, and they were no longer in the driver's seat. They were my dependents. The weight of that new reality was a physical presence in the small car. When we arrived back at the house, my house, I realized with a jolt, as I was now the one preventing its foreclosure, the silence finally broke. My mother followed me into the kitchen, her movements tentative. "Clara, I don't understand," she began, her voice weak. "How could you, where did all of that?" "I learned, Mom," I said, turning to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calm in my tone was more powerful than any shout. While everyone was so certain I was incapable, I was in the library. While Julian was making risky bets, I was studying balance sheets. "It's really not that complicated." Julian shuffled into the doorway. His shoulders slumped. He looked older, defeated. "All this time," he murmured, his voice raspy, "you were watching me fail." "I was watching you make choices, Julian," I corrected him gently. "I tried to warn you. You told me to stick to my paintings." The memory of his casual, cutting dismissal hung in the air between us. This was the moment for my grand, vengeful speech, the cinematic, "I told you so." But looking at his broken form, I felt no desire for it. The victory wasn't in rubbing his face in his failure. It was in the quiet, indisputable fact of my success. The real work was just beginning. "Things are going to be different now," I announced, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "The days of unchecked spending and grand projects are over. I've saved this family from ruin, but we are not going back to the way things were. We are going to live within a budget. A strict one." My mother's hand flew to her pearls. "A budget? But darling, the club memberships, the charity board." "Mom," I cut her off, my tone firm but not unkind. It was the first time I had ever truly interrupted her. "The club will have to be suspended. Your position on the board can be maintained if the donation is reasonable. These are the new realities." I turned to Julian. "You will no longer have a company credit card. You will be given a monthly allowance for personal expenses, just enough to get by until you find a job." The irony was so perfect, so complete that it was almost beautiful. He would now live the life he had forced upon me. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had no fight left in him. Later that evening, after my mother had retreated to her room with a headache, Julian found me in the study. Our father's study. I was sitting at the great oak desk, a laptop open in front of me, already untangling the complex web of debt he had created. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "How?" he asked again, the question simple, yet containing a universe of disbelief. "How did you know? About ConnectSphere, about the crypto crash. You were always one step ahead." I leaned back in the chair. "Fit me perfectly." "You were playing poker," I explained. "You were betting on a hand, hoping for a lucky card." "I was playing chess. I wasn't just looking at my pieces. I was looking at the whole board, at your pieces, and thinking 10 moves ahead. You chased hype. I invested in value. They are not the same thing." He finally looked at me then. His eyes filled with a bewildered shame. I'm sorry, Clara," he stammered. "I truly am. I never knew. I never would have imagined." It was an apology of a sort. But it was an apology born of utter defeat, not of genuine understanding. He was sorry he had lost. He was sorry I had won. He wasn't yet sorry for the years of condescension, for the profound disrespect, for never bothering to see me as anything more than the caricature he had created in his own mind. "I know you didn't, Julian," I said, my voice cool and even. "That was the entire problem. You never bothered to look." I didn't grant him the easy relief of forgiveness. He hadn't earned it. His path to redemption, if he chose to walk it, would be long and would be undertaken on his own terms, not mine. My job was not to fix him. It was to fix the mess he had made. The final conversation of that long, transformative day was with my mother. She knocked softly on the study door and entered, carrying a cup of tea, an olive branch. She sat in the visitor's chair, the one where I had sat during the reading of the will, and looked at me across the vast expanse of the desk. "Your father and I," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we always thought we were doing the right thing. We just wanted you to be safe. We thought the world of business was too harsh for you. We put you in a box, Clara. I see that now. It was a terrible mistake." It was the closest she would ever come to a full apology. It was a confession wrapped in an excuse. But for her it was a monumental step. I simply nodded, accepting the tea. "The box you put me in was small, Mom," I said, meeting her gaze. "So small, in fact, that none of you ever thought to look inside it. You gave me the one thing I needed to succeed. Your complete and total disregard. You made me invisible. And in that invisibility, I was free to become myself. A year can change everything." 1 year after the fall of the House of Hawthorne, a new structure stood in its place, built on a foundation of discipline, transparency, and my unwavering authority. The family home was secure, the debts were a memory, and the new Hawthorne Trust under my management was not just stable, but growing at a steady, sensible pace. Life had found a new, quieter rhythm. Julian, humbled by necessity, found a job as a mid-level manager at a logistics company, one I had secretly invested in years ago through Aurelius, a fact he would never know. He was good at it, surprisingly. When stripped of the pressure to be a visionary genius, he was a competent, detail-oriented administrator. He lived in a small apartment downtown and was learning, for the first time in his 40 years of life, the value of a dollar he had actually earned. Our relationship was cordial, professional. He would send me meticulously detailed expense reports, and I would approve them. The condescension was gone, replaced by a wary, hard-won respect. My mother, too, had adapted. She had resigned from her more ostentatious charity boards and poured her energy into volunteering at the local animal shelter, the one I used to work at. She found a genuine purpose there that her lunches and galas had never provided. She started treating me not as her flighty daughter, but as her confidant, her advisor. She would ask for my opinion on things, and she would actually listen to the answer. As for me, Clara Hawthorne was no longer hiding behind a pseudonym. Aurelius was retired. I had stepped into the light. I opened my own firm, Hawthorne Capital, and quickly gained a reputation for my calm demeanor, my razor-sharp analysis, and my uncanny ability to find value where no one else was looking. My office was a world away from that dusty library corner. It was sleek, modern, with a glass wall that overlooked the city, a city I now saw not as a place of limitations, but of endless possibilities. One of my firm's first major philanthropic projects was to provide the seed funding for a statewide expansion of a chain of independent bookstores. The flagship store, The Last Page, was now a thriving literary hub, and Mrs. Gable's son was its celebrated CEO. She had retired from the library and now spent her afternoons in a comfortable armchair in the bookstore's cafe, a quiet, knowing smile on her face whenever I came to visit. My journey hadn't been about revenge. I realized that sitting at my desk, watching the sun set over the skyline, revenge is a hot, messy emotion, and my work had been cold, precise, and methodical. It had been about survival at first, and then it had transformed into something more. A quest for self-worth. I had needed to prove to myself that I was more than they thought I was. The ultimate irony was that, in their attempt to protect me from the world, they gave me the perfect camouflage. By underestimating me, they gave me the space I needed to grow, to learn, and to become stronger than any of them could have ever imagined. Their blindness had been my invisibility cloak. The world may try to write your story for you, to put you in a box with a neat little label. The flighty one, the artistic one, the one who just doesn't understand. They'll define your limits and tell you who you are. But you are the only one who holds the pen. You are the only one who gets to write the ending. I'd love to hear your own stories. Have you ever been underestimated, and how did you prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. This is a safe space to celebrate those victories, big and small. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. And please subscribe for more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your own narrative. Sharing this video might help someone else who is feeling overlooked and needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to look past the labels people give you and to find the quiet, unstoppable power that lies within. Remember, your true value is something only you can define.